what I'm going to talk about is basically a project that I was involved in developing. We started in 2010 and I think ended in 2015. It was funded by National Research Foundation, which is quite relevant to the problem of urban space in Singapore. And I'm going to highlight some of the key features of the project and my sort of sociological examinations of this project to cities like Singapore. In order to understand the whole backgrounds of why the idea of going underwater was so prevalent in a city like Singapore, I think it's very important to see that Singapore is a country that constantly keeps growing. So economically, we can say that Singapore is sort of obese. Obese in the sense that the amount of resources that it has, is far behind the desire to grow and to expand rapidly. And this is the reason why Singapore is so much dependent on globalization. But the thing is, there is one kind of resource that Singapore cannot import. You can import labor, you can import vegetable, you can import fuel, but you can't really import space. You have to create within yourself. And that's the thing about space production in Singapore. And because of this urgency of creating space that will be able to accommodate the economic interests of Singapore, the link to engineering and technology is very much strong. And this is where I sort of draw my analysis of the characteristic of the underwater city in Singapore. So of course, as we all know, this is the city of Singapore. The total land mass is 700 kilometers per square, and if you now, of course, the economy is very much driven by sort of state capitalism. The GN per capita is one of the highest. GDP per capita is also one of the highest. The total GDP is 300 billion US dollars with composition of industry, services, and etc. And if you look at if you compare the space of Singapore and the space of Los Angeles, you can see here that this is the city of Los Angeles. It's very much like much bigger than Singapore, but then there's a 5.5 million people live here, while in Los Angeles all the way to San Diego there's a 5.5 million people. So I think this is a good comparison to see how dense Singapore compared to other areas that are very much similar in terms of economic development. And but interestingly, and this is something that I think Singapore's government is very much proud of, that despite the high density of Singapore, the level of livability is also high. And in order to maintain this livability, you need a certain amount of open space that will be allocated for some social activities. So you can't really exploit all of the space for economic production, because otherwise it will affect the degree of livability in Singapore. And that's the reason why Singapore continues to search for multiple ways of space production. And for the past 50 years, this is exactly what Singapore has been doing. It's going up by building high-rise building, etc. It's going horizontal. It's expanded horizontally by doing reclamations and etc. So you can see that I think around maybe 20% of the land mass in Singapore is produced through reclamations. and now the new train is going underground. But but the Singapore government, realized that all of these methods and approaches have limits. So they tried to find new solution for that, and that's where NTU engineers came up and offer sort of solutions to overcome this space crisis in Singapore by creating what they call as underwater city. And of course, this is something that is not really difficult for engineers to convince, because Singapore is very much has a lot of experience in conducting or building extreme engineering. So you can find that there is a number of projects in Singapore that very much developed using advanced technologies that NTU engineers developed and contributed to the protection of space in Singapore. But what is interesting in this particular project is that it shows that it is time now to go to underwater. Try to find ways of living underwater in order to expand the limited space of Singapore. So these are some of the advantages highlighted by NTU engineers in proposing this project. There's no landfill required like in reclamations. There's double space that is created, and it's sort of new technological innovation that can be exported to other countries or other cities like Singapore. So basically, the structure of the underwater cities is like this. So you have this facility off the shore, but then it's still connected with the mainland, and yeah, of course the fish is not that big, so this is just like a aquarium. So yeah, this is sort of the concept of the underground space. So if you do reclamation, basically you get only the above water, and this you have to fill with sand that you import from Vietnam or Indonesia. But then now it is quite unlikely to import more sands from neighboring countries. So the NTU engineers proposed this concept in which the new technology is applied. So basically they use a new concrete technology to build this structure in which that creates space above and under the water. So how do we take on this? Now, of course, some sociologists are familiar. For sociologists, they are familiar with this, scholar. But I think I found something, interesting about the concept of social production, which highlights the role of the dominant group, which is in this case, the engineers and planners, and how they imagine the city, how they are so dominant and powerful in shaping, the structure and the forms of, city space. And this is what I call as a peculiar space. So the role of engineers in Singapore is so, I would say, so powerful, but at the same time, they realize that Singapore has, a limited amount of space, and the result is that we need to find something that is not, ordinary, and this is how the peculiarity of space, emerged out of the what I call, technocratic urbanisms. The application of engineering logics and new technologies that result in new kind of spaces that may have different impact on society at large.